This episode is brought to you by ProMensal.
Look, there are lots of women who will know, as night follows day, that if they get into a hot car, they're going to have a hot flush. If they have a glass of wine, they're going to start hot flushing. So a lot of women stop drinking. A lot of us really don't stop drinking either. We go the other way. But if you know what your triggers are, happy you, because you can avoid them. But most of us have got absolutely no idea, and they just come on seemingly completely randomly and at the worst possible time.
Welcome to Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Magazine. I'm Andrea Duval, editor of Prevention. Today I'm talking with GP and author Dr. Ginni Mansberg. Ginni recently published a terrific book called The M Word, which is all about, you guessed it, she's spent a lot of time looking at the latest cutting-edge research, so I wanted her to explain to us what's going on with our bodies. Ginni, let's start with the burning question. Why is it that you can be feeling perfectly fine 1 minute and the next feel is overwhelming heat pouring out of you? It's like a raging inferno inside. What's going on?
Are you having a hot flush? That's pretty common, actually. So in terms of menopause, we're looking at 75% of women having hot flushes. Now, if you look at that 75%, a third of them will have pretty mild symptoms, a third will be pretty bad, and a third of those women would describe those hot flushes as unbearable. So, I'm kind of, my back of the envelope maths is sort of saying around 1 in 4 women who go through menopause have those unbearable hot flushes. That sucks.
Well, I've heard that a third of women experience 10 or more hot flushes a day. That's a lot.
Right. And then, that's doesn't even include just feeling really hot at night. So women who used to wear like lots of pajamas and bed socks and, 2 doonas, and their husbands would go, oh goodness, aren't you ever warm? And now all of a sudden the husband's like, you're like a furnace. I can't be in the same room as you because you're too hot.
Wow.
So yeah, and that's separate from your hot flushes.
So I want to know, why do they happen so suddenly? Are there triggers? Is it something I maybe did half an hour ago that has caused it to come on? What's the science there?
Yeah, well, if you find out, can you let me know? So we've been studying it, and seriously, we are a little in the dark about this. Look, there are lots of women who will know, as night follows day, that if they get into a hot car, they're going to have a hot flush. If they have a glass of wine, they're going to start hot flushing. So a lot of women stop drinking. A lot of us really don't stop drinking either. We go the other way. But if you know what your triggers are, happy you, because you can avoid them. But most of us have got absolutely no idea, and they just come on seemingly completely randomly and at the worst possible time.
So what are some of the simple things that women can do to help ease hot flushes?
Well, you probably want to get some clothes off fairly quickly. So dress in layers is my hot tip. Even in winter, you probably want to be able to get down into something slightly more appropriate than a bra. So particularly if you're in a business meeting, so I would say a singlet at your bottom layer is fantastic. Always having some really icy cold water with you. And if you're in a meeting, you can just kind of hold it in your hands so it doesn't look too obvious. A lot of women just resort to carrying a fan around with them. If you've got access to like cold water that you can run your hands under, or even a cold face washer that you can put on the back of your neck, but it's not always that easy. If it happens when you're out somewhere or, in the middle of a presentation, it's not that easy.
No, it will always happen at the most inconvenient time. So in terms of prevention then, we will obviously be exploring things like HRT in future episodes, but is that probably the primary main way?
Look, it's the most effective way. We do have other therapies, and there are a number of women who either can't have HRT or won't consider HRT for very personal reasons. And we have a very large number of medications that have got reasonably good evidence for them and pretty good reductions in hot flushes. Nothing is as good as HRT. But, a lot of people just don't want medications at all. And then we're into things like hypnosis, which I'm really skeptical about hypnosis. But the studies are pretty good for hypnosis when it comes to reducing hot flushes.
Really?
Whereas things like exercise and yoga, which I would have thought is just a double plus good no matter what you're going through, has been extensively studied for hot flushes. Absolute bust, doesn't work at all. And then there's a whole raft of sort of herbal therapies that range from look pretty good in the single trial of 20 people that they were done in, that lasted for 3 weeks, to wow, what a complete disaster, avoid like the plague. And so I think the good news is that, there are a number of things that are out there, from the amazing, HRT to the, if it doesn't, if it's not a complete car crash in terms of your health risks, you could try it. And if it works for you, that's great. And everything in between.
I've heard it said that, hot flushes say something about your health. They're a bit of an indicator of other things that might be going on?
Yeah, so we know smokers have worse hot flushes being overweight. You definitely have more hot flushes. And given that menopause is a time where so many women start stacking on kilos, even if they remain in a healthy weight range, but the range is, often 13, 14 kilos from top to bottom. So they can go from the bottom of the range to the top of the range, now have grown 2 dress sizes. They're still, in that healthy weight range, but they've stacked on the kilos. And that's definitely, losing weight is difficult when you're in menopause, but the irony is the more you put on, the worse your hot flushes are.
Is it true that your mum's experience is a good indication of the kind of menopause that you might have?
Anecdotally, from my patients, I think it probably is, but studies don't back me up on that. So that's the Mansberg School of Theory as opposed to the university-endorsed view.
Let's look at some of the other things, because hot flushes aren't the only symptoms of menopause. And when I think back to my time in perimenopause around, say, the age of 45, I had incredible spells of exhaustion and mood swings and incredible migraines. I mean, I was even hospitalised. They were that bad. What I do remember is at 3 a.m, I'd get up, I'd be sick of tossing in bed all night, and I would watch Netflix until dawn. So I love my doctor, but she didn't recognise, and it's only hindsight now that I look back at this time and go, that was my perimenopause. So how do you spot it? And I guess are many doctors switched on to spotting it?
Let's first talk about how you would spot it, because it's not like you can get a test. Oh, yes, you're positive for perimenopause, like I'm positive for HIV, or it's a pregnancy test. I've weed on a stick. There it is. It's perimenopause. We absolutely have got no idea. So we've got to look at the constellation of kind of symptoms that we've got. And as you say, it's often in retrospect. So moody. Look, a lot of us are stressed. We're all in the sandwich generation. We've all got, kids who are doing crazy stuff. We've got our parents who are getting sicker. We're often at a point in our careers where things are both more lucrative but also more stressful as well. So we've got, that kind of stress. There's often relationship stress. So, there's all of that going on. So you don't always connect the dots with your moodiness. Why am I not sleeping? Oh, well, I'm stressed. You don't necessarily think about the fact that, hang on, I used to be like an Olympic level sleeper. I am now basically pacing the floor 3 times a night. I don't understand what is going on. And you don't connect the dots. Aches and pains, a lot of us will go, oh, my back is a bit sore. Well, I'm getting older. I've put on weight. Oh, well, I'm getting older. We don't necessarily connect the dots. And for me as a doctor, I look at women and if they bring me maybe one of those symptoms, and I'll ask them about the others, and I'll go, you're smack bang in the age of perimenopause. So what is that? That's the 6 to 8 years leading up till official menopause, which is a dot in time. It's the 12 months since your last normal menstrual period. That's the day you go into menopause, crack your champagne, that's it. But in the years leading up to that, that's your, I call it hormone hell, because literally no 2 hours are the same, no 2 days are the same, no 2 weeks are the same. And it can often feel, my patients tell me they think they're going crazy.
As a GP, what are the most common questions you get asked about menopause?
So often what will happen is I'll have someone come in and say, I want to get a hormone test. And I'll go, what's going on? This is more in the beginning because, my growing interest in menopause means that I'm often leading the charge on these conversations rather than letting my patients bring it to me. But they used to come in and say, I want to get a hormone test. And I'd be thinking, well, hormone tests? What's happening with your periods? Oh, they're coming every 3 weeks. I now know that's like, warning, that's perimenopause. That absolutely is a big sign before they start becoming really erratic and becoming, every 8 weeks and then every 2 weeks and then every 10 weeks and then you haven't had one for 6 months and then boom, you get one every 2 weeks. That's also perimenopause a little bit later. But in the early days, they would come in and when I'd say, why do you want to know about your hormones? They'd bring out things like, I'm so moody, I'm so tired, I'm crying all the time, I'm putting on weight. And they would have these sort of really vague symptoms laced with a whole lot of inbuilt misogyny that I don't think they even recognised, where you blame female hormones for anything that makes you a less lovely version of yourself in your own eyes. And women's self-esteem at this time literally falls through the floor. No one is whistling at you in the road anymore. Now, not that we ever loved it, but now all of a sudden it's like, what, no one notices me? Maybe you're not having as much sex anymore. Maybe, your husband or your partner is not even as attracted to you anymore. You feel really terrible about yourself. And then you've got all these mood things thrown in. And of course, your first thought is it's all hormones. The woman in me gets my back up about it, except that it's all true.
Perimenopause can actually start in your 40s. Declining estrogen production during perimenopause brings on changes to menstrual cycles and often the onset of hot flushes, night sweats, mood swings, and sexual problems. Promensal Peri is specifically designed for perimenopausal women and can help relieve these common menopausal symptoms. Promensal Peri is available at leading pharmacies across Australia and offers a cost-effective treatment at under $1 a day. When things start to change, try Promensal Peri. Always read the label and follow the directions for use.
In your book, you explain really clearly exactly what's going on. And so I'd love to hear from you. We know that these hormones are doing crazy things, but perhaps you can unpack for us quite simply the science of what's going on in our bodies.
Okay, so I don't want to traumatise anybody by taking them back to year 9 science, but we'll just do a quick précis of what a normal menstrual cycle is. So on day 0, where there are no hormones coming out of the brain, everything's very quiet. For some reason, the brain will send out a little message using a hormone called FSH, and it tells egg of the month to start growing. And the egg starts growing in this little bubble that we call the follicle. And when the bubble gets big enough, and it's sort of putting out some estrogen all the time, only estrogen. And when the bubble gets big enough and the estrogen level gets high enough, that triggers another hormone from the brain called LH, luteinizing hormone, that tells this bubble burst. Send the egg off into the fallopian tube to go and meet the sperm of its dreams. And meanwhile, the little bubble turns into the corpus luteum. You remember that from Year 9 science? The corpus luteum is a little collection of cells that starts pumping out estrogen and progesterone. And progesterone only gets made in the second half of the cycle when you have a nice chunky corpus luteum. That gradually over 2 weeks it dies, and then you're back to day 0, and the whole thing starts all over again. You get a period. Now, when you start to go through perimenopause, that whole system does not work so well. The follicle might burst too early. That's when you'll get periods that are closer together. It's an ovulation, but that corpus luteum is just not very good, and you don't get great levels of progesterone. So you get great levels of estrogen, but not great levels of progesterone. To top that all off, estrogen is made by your fat cells as well, separately. So the more overweight you are, the more estrogen you're making, but you're not making that nice counterbalancing progesterone. And that has a couple of effects. Number one, you get way too much blood inside your uterus. So you get very heavy Armageddon periods, and they're coming way too often. And that is super common. We're seeing that in 1 in 4, 1 in 3 women around perimenopause time. The other thing is the way your corpus luteum makes progesterone is it takes testosterone, puts it through the corpus luteum factory and spits it out as progesterone. Now, if that system is not happening very well, you get a big build-up of testosterone, which is not, you really miss it when you've gone through menopause and your libido's tanked. But in your perimenopause time, you've got acne, you've got chin hair, you've got sweating, you've got your hair falling out of your head. There are all of these things that you really don't want. You've now got weight going around your middle instead of on your thighs and your bum. So all of these things are happening because your hormones are changing. And eventually, the whole system runs out of puff and you're not even making estrogen anymore.
And that is
menopause. That's your day.
So one of the strongest support systems we have around this time in our life, I suppose, is our girlfriends. And I love the fact that you talk about them as the university of my girlfriends. It's great to share, not feel I'm not the only one, and even get tips and advice from them. What's the best tip you got from your girlfriends?
I have to put the caveat on here that even though I'm 52 and I know that I must technically be in perimenopause now, I don't have a lot of the symptoms. I think I'm not sleeping as well as I used to, even though I used to be, one of those gold medalist sleepers. So I think that's probably there. But other than that, I'm not really getting it. So I'm not getting the personal tips because it's not really happening to me yet. I'm sort of still having periods every 28 days. I don't know when. My mum was 56 when she went through menopause, so I'm sort of thinking it'll happen at some point. But I would say the best tip I would say is find a doctor who will validate you, find a doctor who will listen to you and who will work with you to help you go through this period, because people can be as kind and as supportive and as loving and as patient as they like, but it still doesn't make you feel any better if you're weepy, sweaty, hot, overweight, no libido, dry vagina, all the rest of it. And so I think finding a supportive healthcare professional who can help get you through it, then go and lean on your girlfriends and your partner as well, because I'm not sure that they're a decent substitute as much as I think they're important.
I guess there are aspects of menopause that we don't really talk to our girlfriends about, the less glamorous side, things like bladder leakage. So why does that happen and why now?
Well, there are two types of bladder leakage broadly. And you know what's really weird? I know what the stats are. I'm a doctor who loves talking about menopause and I love talking about vaginas. I'm like, show me a good vagina. I'm like a pig in poo. I'm so happy. Show me a penis. I'm just not quite as confident, but I'm really good on a vagina. And yet I'll say to my patients, how's your bladder? Oh, fine. Hardly ever do they admit to me that there's a problem with their bladder. So there are two types of incontinence. The first one is what we call stress incontinence. And that's, I don't know about you, but I haven't jumped on a trampoline for, I don't know for how long. It's just a very dangerous pursuit. That's when you wear black leggings all the time. That's why Lululemon makes 10,000 types of black leggings and very few white ones, because they're for the 20-year-olds who've got a decent bladder. And that's when you cough, you sneeze, and a bit of wee comes out, or a lot of wee comes out, and pelvic floor exercises are great for those. It is related to having children, to childbirth. It is about sort of stretching the muscles that sit underneath your bladder. There's another form of incontinence called urge incontinence, and that one is when you get up in the middle of the night to pee. I've got my hand up for that one as well. And then you don't even know what happens. Like, you're standing there with the key in the door. You know that the toilet is like a 10-metre walk away, and you're almost weeing in your pants as the key's in the door. And it's like, 2 minutes ago, I did not need to wee. There's no jumping. There's no sneezing. You're not laughing. You're standing there with the key in the door and like, boom, out it comes. And you can lose everything at that point. And that's called urge incontinence. And that is not pelvic floor physio, and pelvic floor exercise is not going to do anything to help that whatsoever, unfortunately. And we need to do things like bladder retraining, which is a whole cognitive behavioural therapy thing that we do, and there are medications for that as well. So we've got these two parallel types of incontinence, but most women have a bit of both.
And so don't be afraid of bringing it up with your doctor. And if you're not feeling you're comfortable with your doctor, this is a good time to find someone that can support you through these more embarrassing kind of intimate aspects of what's going on.
Yeah, and I would just remind everybody that the Australian Menopause Society does have a find a doctor function, and it's done state by state. And the good thing about that is the members of the Australian Menopause Society have all undergone a special interest, lots of training, lots of webinars. We attend congresses around menopause. So whatever is the latest in menopause, we'll probably be up to date with it. And most importantly, we passionately care about it enough to voluntarily join this organisation and sign up and pay money, because it means a lot to us. And that probably means that we will at least listen to you.
So, Ginni, what are some of the other symptoms that you regularly see in your practice that we haven't spoken about?
Aches and pains would be a really big one. In fact, in some studies, it's more common than hot flushes. And amazingly enough, they often get better with hormone replacement therapy. So back pain, leg pains, those sorts of things. And I've had lots of patients who've come in thinking that would not be to do with their menopause and go on HRT for hot flushes or for bone health or something like that, and end up saying to me, actually, I don't have any back pain anymore. So that's just one to keep in mind. Dry vagina, I do need to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. A lot of girls get itchy in the vagina. They get dry. Sex is uncomfortable. That is something that women really don't talk about. And the statistics are horrible. And unlike hot flushes, that in 19 out of 20 women, if you're prepared to wait them out, they'll get better. The dry vagina will just get worse over time. It will get much worse to the point where at age 65, 80% of women have some sort of vaginal problems. And that is a pretty nasty statistic. I think in this day and age, very few of us are happy to turn our sex lives off and put a tombstone over it at age 60, 65. That's not happening. So I think that is worth at least mentioning. And the skin things, women's skin gets drier, thinner, itchier. Of course, you're going to get more wrinkles, you're going to get more pigmentation, you're going to get bigger pores. Your looks are going to change. And, I think for some of us, that's pretty tough to sort of deal with that. For other women, I think for my grandmother's age, they looked so old. By the time they were 60, they looked elderly. These days, 60-year-old women don't want to look old and elderly, but there are some inexorable changes in the skin that we definitely see as you go through menopause.
Now, I heard that you lose something like 30% of the collagen in your skin as you go through menopause.
Yeah, and then it keeps getting lower and lower amount. And the cells that actually make new collagen disappear. And there are a number of other changes where the shape of the skin, so it becomes much thinner. So instead of wave-like structures in the deeper layers of the skin, they become flattened out and the skin just becomes more easily traumatized. It has much more what we call transepidermal water loss, so that the skin becomes drier, and that will often make it much itchier as well. So there are so many women who all of a sudden just get itchy, and they'd never had that before, to the point where they can feel like they've got like bugs crawling on their skin, and that's not that uncommon when you're going through menopause.
If I take HRT, can I reverse some of those skin changes?
HRT hasn't ironically been studied that much for the skin, but anecdotally most women will say that their skin definitely looks and feels better. Here in Australia, we have a lot of sun damage, and a lot of us who are sun worshippers have got, by the time we hit 50, we look like a 70-year-old British woman because, they don't see much sun. And so there is only so much that we can, let's say, reverse without really intensive skincare and maybe a bit of Botox as well. So, but for most women, they get rid of the really dryness and the itchiness.
We talk about perimenopause and then menopause. And then what? Do all the symptoms suddenly stop?
So the one that we've studied the most is hot flushes, which I have to say is a very Eurocentric way of doing things. Because if you look at Asian women, both from South Asia and East Asia, aches and pains are far more common. And we do know that aches and pains respond really well to HRT. But with the hot flushes, they will, if you're prepared to wait them out, and the average length is 7.4 years, unless they started during perimenopause, and guess what, 11.7 years, but is average. But only 1 in 20 will be what we call super flushes and flush for the rest of their lives. For 19 out of 20 women, they will eventually go away. But I think that 7.4 years is a pretty long time, particularly if you have moderate to severe hot flushes, because that means that you're having at least one a day, and you are going to be losing sleep because of your hot flushes. So that is quite a long time to wait. In terms of the vaginal symptoms, they will continue to get worse year on year. Mood-wise, actually crossing the Rubicon from perimenopause to menopause actually tends to see you move from very teary, very miserable to one of the happiest stages of women's lives. And I've often been wondering about this, like, why are we so happy after menopause? And I think that probably we've just come to terms with who we are. We're not, really hunkered down by the BS that sort of keeps us trying to please other people. We can be more comfortable to just say, no, I can't do that, sorry. Often our kids are leaving home and they're becoming financially independent. You don't worry about them quite as much. We'll always worry about our kids. I think we also really put a big stock of value on our girlfriends. But I think we have to remember here in Australia that, statistics around homelessness and joblessness and poverty amongst older women are growing. And there are a group of women for whom this period is terrible. And like so many things in Australian society, there's another group for whom it's just a fantastic time of their lives.
Yeah, so I'm really pumped on the idea that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that what's ahead is me time.
Absolutely. And I think, once you can start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel where you're not going to be working 5 incredibly long days a week, where you're going to actually be able to enjoy a couple of holidays without the kids, without having to wake up at 5 in the morning to sort of feed a kid, is actually sort of quite a nice thought, really.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed this chat, please subscribe to our podcast. And if you want more from us, visit preventionaus.com.au. That's preventionaus.com.au. This episode was produced by Lisa Geberlagen for Prevention Magazine. Up next, we'll be chatting with nutrition scientist Dr. Joanna McMillan about why we gain weight during menopause and how you can avoid it. See you next time.